But one time Rich Johnson becomes an actual journalist, he gets demoted. Imagine for a moment that you run a comic book news site. Your job is to report on news within and about the comic book industry and other related media. This job would include talking to editors-in-chief, PR representatives, comic book retailers, convention hosts, and comic book creators. Now imagine there are controversial creators, writers and artists whose work and personal views put them at odds with publishers, their fellow creators, and the general fandom. Any good journalist would want to interview these people. The more in-depth and candid the interview, the better. Controversial figures bring attention. They also test the skill and talent of journalists. If the person's views are truly terrible, the journalist will be able to expose that by asking the right questions and letting the person reveal their terrible ideas all on their own. Interviewing controversial, infamous, and even objectively evil people is a hallmark of solid journalism. When it's done well, everybody will probably like it, especially if the questions were hard-hitting but fair. The last thing anyone expects a good journalist to do is apologize for interviewing controversial people. In comes Bleeding Cool. Bleeding Cool is a news site that supposedly reports on the comic book, gaming, film, and TV industries. I say supposedly because a large number of the articles aren't reports but rants poorly disguised as op-eds, and its staff is prone to openly expressing their political views even in the most mundane articles. I wouldn't call Bleeding Cool a news site so much as a propaganda site for the far left. So this far-left propaganda site decided to interview noted far-right activist and comic book creator Vox Day. Vox Day has had a host of controversy surrounding him as a result of his views. Some have called him racist and a white supremacist. What little I know about Vox Day is that he comes off as a bit of an opportunist, attaching himself to things like Gamergate and Comicsgate in an effort to make money. His most recent venture into comics was the book Alt Hero, a comic that seems to play on the worst stereotypes about the right wing, but in a way that makes it difficult to tell if it's satire, parody, serious, or some combination of the three. The reviews for the book weren't great, and I'm not talking about the typical lefty reviewers. Even among the YouTube crowd, people seem to find it just an inverse of the far left stuff that we see coming from major publishers. That said, Vox Day recruited some solid talent like John Delarose and Chuck Dixon to work on his comics, and he's had a major impact in the conversation about politics and comics, so it makes sense to interview him. So Bleeding Cool did just that, and then pulled the article. Of course, people archive the article, so you can still read it if you have a data waste. It's got this weird novella-linked stream of consciousness preamble before it gets to the actual interview. I'll post the archive link below. Now, let's get started with the general problem here. You don't pull articles because readers bitch about them. It's one thing if the article is loaded with errors, it's another thing when you're doing it just because of some flack. And that's what happened here. People on the left, and probably people within Bleeding Cool, got pissy about Vox Day being given, quote, a platform. An interview isn't a platform. It's an interview. The entire point of it is to expose someone's views. Interviewing someone you disagree with, even someone you detest, just shows off your journalistic integrity. The goal is to be fair and balanced and let the public decide. But in this highly partisan age, that's not allowed on the left. Allowing anyone with a different opinion to speak is basically endorsing them. Of course, that's total bullshit, but this is a snowflake crowd we're talking about. Rationality isn't exactly their forte. So these folks bitch and moan and get Bleeding Cool to pull the article because Vox Day is controversial. Well, he could be all that they say and more. A total white supremacist, opportunistic asshat. But the moment you pull an interview with him because people who probably don't even read your site complain about you talking to him, you lose all journalistic credibility. Nothing you do from now on, Bleeding Cool, can be seen as anything other than pandering. You've proven that the Snowflake Mafia runs your site. And I'd love to take credit for that term, but one of my commenters came up with it and it's fucking awesome. And just to prove how completely ridiculous this got, Rich Johnson got demoted because he had the temerity to think an interview wasn't giving someone a platform. So you've demoted the guy, who honestly wasn't the best at his job, because at last he found his journalistic integrity again for the first time for the last time. Seriously, he lost his job because he acted like a journalist. Inconceivable. But not as inconceivable as this. Quote, we at Bleeding Cool wish to issue an apology. Nope. You're apologizing? You're publicly apologizing? What kind of dickless, mealy-mouthed bullshit? What are you apologizing for? You did your job. You literally did the thing that lets you call yourselves journalists. This is so fucking stupid. Well, go on. Let's hear your vagina monologue. Bleeding Cool does not support bigotry of any kind, nor will we become a bullhorn for bigots of the world to go off. Yeah, you do. You guys are a shill for the far left. It's plastered all over your site, and people would be able to see it if they could get past all the goddamn pop-ups. Bleeding Cool is totally fine with bigotry as long as it's directed at the right people. In this case, literally right-wing people, and anyone with an ounce of independent thinking. But you were groveling. Today, one of our writers made an error in judgment, resulting in giving exposure to viewpoints we abhor. We will do better going forward, and that is a promise. The author admits that this was an extreme error of judgment that never should have been made, and that other members of the Bleeding Cool writing staff were unaware of the contents of this article. Translation: We're sorry. We behaved like actual journalists. We understand that you read Bleeding Cool for the echo chamber, not objective journalism. We won't make the mistake of doing our actual jobs again. We'll do worse. Well, at least we know where Lindsey Graham found his balls. In a first step towards that end, we are announcing, effective immediately, I am stepping into the role of editor-in-chief and will be implementing new review policies across the Bleeding Cool teams. Oh, Rich. I feel sorry for you. This is so pathetic. It's like watching a nerd publicly apologizing to the whole school for saying he liked the popular girl. No, actually it's worse than that. It's like listening to some black dude apologizing to his family for flirting with a white woman. Just sad. That said, I'm all for some new review policies because you guys really don't seem to review anything you publish. I mean, how do you publish something with this rambling essay in front of it? I'm here for an interview, and now I've got to sit through the goddamn Epic of Gilgamesh. All the editing mistakes and factual errors Bleeding Cool usually has is just embarrassing, but I know that's not what you mean when you talk about changing the policy. What you mean is that you guys are implementing some good old Ministry of Truth policies to make sure all future articles conform to the latest version of the Newspeak Dictionary. Big Brother would be proud. Double plus praise to Ingsoc. Yesterday, an extensive interview was run with publisher, author, and political figure Vox Day. The intention of the interview was to investigate Day's political and ideological views and his operations as a publisher, but these intentions do not matter. The intent of the article and the interview were poorly executed and poorly communicated. Well, on that we can agree. We didn't need the Lord of the Rings prologue before getting into the interview, and the interview itself was a mess. If the idea was supposed to be a hit piece, yeah, then you failed. The thing was all over the place, wavering between gotcha questions, genuine questions, and attempts to make some grand point that never happened. That really should have been caught by an editor, and to be perfectly honest, you shouldn't have published the damn thing if that was what you were going to do. That's a complete detriment to the concept of journalism. But, while the intentions of the author might have been one thing, the reality of the situation is another. Bleeding Cool would like to issue a sincere apology to everyone for the article in question. Still sad to see you apologizing for literally doing your job as a journalist. Absolutely pathetic. We do not, in any way, agree with the ideology of Vox Day. Interviewing someone is not the same as agreeing with them. Jesus, how retarded are you guys that you can't see this? And honestly, you had to know you were going to get shit for this. The far left always gives people shit unless the article is a total hit piece. So why do it if you knew this would happen? We do not support divisiveness in the fan community or in our culture at large. We do not support those that try to bring down others. Is that why you run anti-conservative, anti-Christian, anti-male, and anti-white articles on your site? You've got no problem posting divisive articles about people who don't align with your politics, so cut the bullshit. We support diversity in all aspects of pop culture. We support everyone fighting a good fight against bigotry and only wish we could play a part in making not only the internet but the world a safer place for all individuals. So all that stuff before about not supporting divisiveness was bullshit, huh? Because let's be honest here, anytime you start labeling people bigots, you're being divisive. Real diversity is diversity of thought and opinion, not just people peddling your brand of self-righteous propaganda. If you were really about diversity, you'd review some conservative-themed and Christian-themed books. You'd have openly moderate and conservative writers publishing on your site. But you don't because you're really not about diversity, so stop it. We cannot apologize enough for the people we have offended. You know, they're called the perpetually offended for a reason. These are the same people who just attacked Chelsea Kane for writing a comic book about little girls' periods and not including transgender girls who, don't have periods because they don't have uteruses and ovaries. These are the same people who praised Brian Michael Bendis for creating Riri Williams, and then the next day, not even 24 hours later, trashed the man for being white and said that he shouldn't be allowed to write his own character. These people look for reasons to be offended, and when they can't find one, they'll be offended that you didn't offend them. Why do you care what the fuck they say? They don't matter. Stop worrying about them and stop fucking apologizing to them. You're never gonna stop apologizing to them if you keep saying sorry every time they bat a fucking eye. Let them damsel. It doesn't matter. We cannot apologize enough for the breach of trust. I can't read the whole fucking thing because wait. You actually think people trust you? Bleeding cool. Bleeding cool. Nobody trusts you. If you said your articles were written in English, people would use Google Translate just to check. Trust you. Oh yeah, no. We hope you'll be willing to give us a chance to win back that trust in some capacity. We will do better. How? You just demoted your editor-in-chief for behaving like a journalist. You've thrown out all your credibility. It can only go downhill from here. No one has any reason to assume Bleeding Cool is anything other than a shill rag for the far left. Unless you intend on bringing in writers from different political backgrounds and actually covering things from a non-political slant, you're really wasting your time. Just continue to pander to the people who attacked you. That always goes so well. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.